Those were the words Everett Crane, the 41-year-old husband of Davia Crane, said while standing in the middle of her father's hospital room, with the old man still breathing through a machine 6 feet away. Not whispered, said. Like the room was empty except for him. Davia Merritt Crane, 37, sat in the chair she had not left in 4 days. Her father's hand rested inside both of hers. The monitors above the bed beeped in slow, steady intervals. She had memorized that sound the way people memorize the sound of a house settling at night. Involuntary, constant, a rhythm she had stopped noticing until Everett's voice cut through it. "I've been trying to say this for months," Everett said. "Your father being sick doesn't change what I need." What he needed, it turned out, was Sable Voss, the 29-year-old lead creative director at Holloway Bridgman Architecture, the firm Everett had joined 18 months ago as senior partner. What he needed was a divorce. What he needed was to say all of this now, tonight, with the cardiac monitor running behind his wife's shoulder and the night nurse just outside the door. Davia did not scream. She looked at her father's face first. Warren Merritt, 71, founder of Merritt Holloway Design Group, and the man who had spent 40 years building a name in commercial architecture that other men spent careers trying to borrow, was unconscious. He could not hear, or at least that was what the doctors believed. Davia was not so certain. She had read that hearing was the last sense to go. She had been careful these 4 days to speak only gentle things near his ear. She looked at Everett and said very quietly, "You chose this room." Everett had the decency to look away for exactly 2 seconds. Then he set a folded envelope on the arm of the chair she was sitting in, near her elbow, where her father's coffee used to sit when he worked late. "It's better to be honest," he said. Davia did not touch the envelope. She looked at her father's hand and thought about the way he had taught her to read blueprints before she could read novels, how he had sat her on his drafting table at age 6 and traced the lines of a floor plan with her finger, explaining that every wall existed because someone had decided it should, that decisions made on paper became the spaces where people lived their lives. Everett left before the night nurse came back in. Davia sat with her father until dawn, the envelope untouched on the chair arm, her hands still wrapped around his. She did not open it until 3 days later, sitting in the parking garage of Merritt Holloway's flagship building on Calvert Street after the meeting she was not perhaps to be in. Her name was not on the lobby directory. It had never been. Her father had protected her that way, the same way he had protected the company's ownership structure for 15 years. Quietly, legally, through a holding entity called Wavecrest Partners that appeared in public filings as an institutional investor. No photographs, no press profiles, no LinkedIn page that connected Davia Merritt Crane to the Merritt in Merritt Holloway Design Group. To the outside world, she was an independent real estate consultant who worked from home and attended industry dinners as a spouse. She had a small office in the building's east wing that said Archival Services on the frosted glass. People assumed she was cataloging old project records for the family trust. Only 4 people at Merritt Holloway knew the truth. Serafina Pohl, 58, the firm's chief financial officer, who had worked beside Warren Merritt since the first office had second-hand furniture and a single drafting table. Colt Raines, 49, the company's legal director and the man who had structured Wavecrest Partners with enough care that no hostile acquirer had successfully mapped it in a decade. Lyndon Nash, 44, the head of internal operations, who ran building access, contracts, and staff logistics with the loyalty of someone who understood what the family had built and why it mattered. And Bex Farrow, 38, Davia's closest friend since college, and the one person who had watched Davia's marriage quietly erode over 4 years without being able to say the word she was thinking. These 4 people watched, and across the firm, Everett Crane watched too, just differently. He had arrived at Merritt Holloway 18 months ago with a portfolio of high-end commercial projects, a reputation for being the kind of talent that made boards feel safe, and a confidence that filled hallways before he walked into them. The partners had voted to bring him in unanimously. Warren had approved the offer from his hospital bed during what everyone assumed was a temporary illness. What Everett did not know, what he had never cared enough to investigate, was that his wife's name appeared in every controlling document of the firm that employed him, that the budget he submitted to for approval, the expense accounts he drew from, the client lists he cultivated, all of it existed inside a structure Davia's family had built before he had ever met her. He had married a woman he thought was quiet. He had no idea quiet was not the same as still. The divorce papers in the envelope were dated 6 days earlier. They had been prepared, Davia noted, during the same week her father had been moved to the cardiac unit. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The attorney listed was someone Everett had hired privately, outside any firm connection. He had been careful about that at least. Davia set the papers on her passenger seat and called Serafina. "I need you to pull Everett's expense file for the last 14 months, she said, before Serafina could say hello. "All of it. Flag anything routed through the Holloway Bridgement project account." Serafina paused for exactly 1 second. "How thorough do you want this?" "Complete," Davia said. Another pause. "Are you all right?" Davia looked at the parking garage ceiling. "My father is still breathing." So yes, that was not entirely true, but it was enough to keep going. What the expense file revealed was not subtle. Everett had billed the Holloway Bridgement account, the firm's largest active project, a $200 million mixed-use development that Davia's father had landed 2 years before his illness, for hotel charges that had nothing to do with the project, a suite in Charleston, 4 nights, a dinner reservation for 2 at a restaurant that billed itself as a private dining experience and did not appear in any project entertainment log, wardrobe allowances categorized as client presentation materials, and a consulting contract paid to an LLC called Voss Creative Services, a company that, when Colt ran the registration, traced back to Sable Voss's home address. Serafina found these things on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, Lyndon had flagged something worse. Everett's building credentials had been used at 1:17 in the morning to access the firm's restricted design archive, his badge. But the footage from the archive hallway camera showed Sable walking in ahead of him, carrying a laptop bag that belonged to the firm's digital library. The archive required a senior partner's authorization for any document export. No export request had been filed. Lyndon called Davia at 11 that night. His voice was the same voice he used for everything, flat, precise, without drama, but there was something underneath it that she had never heard before. "The export log shows 47 files," he said. "Conceptual packages from projects that haven't gone to tender yet, including the Holloway Bridgement residential annexes." Davia was sitting at her father's drafting table. She had brought it to her own home years ago when he stopped working from this address. The surface still smelled faintly of graphite and lemon oil. "Send me the timestamp record," she said. "Already did." She opened her laptop and looked at the log. 47 files. Some of them were projects her father had spent years developing. Some of them were proposals so early in concept that only a senior partner and the controlling ownership had seen them. Sable Voss was a creative director. She had no authorization to see those files. Everett had given it to her anyway. Davia closed the laptop and sat for a long time in the quiet. She thought about a version of Everett she had known once, not loved exactly, but respected. He had been different early on. Thoughtful, focused, genuinely skilled. She had watched him become something else slowly, the way a house develops a lean that no one notices until a door stops closing right. She had kept the door closed herself for a long time, because she had believed in the man behind it. She stopped believing somewhere around the 2nd year. She had kept married anyway, for reasons she had difficulty naming now. Habit, maybe. Hope for something smaller than love. Just steadiness, just decency. He had not given her decency. He had given her paperwork in a hospital room. Bex arrived the next morning without being asked. She appeared at Davia's door with 2 cups of coffee and the direct expression of a woman who had been waiting to say something true for a long time. "Tell me what you need," Bex said. "I need to know who else knew," Davia said. That was the question that mattered. Not whether Everett had stolen files, not whether Sable had helped him. Both of those were already answered. The question was whether anyone inside the firm had helped them move without detection, whether there was a board member who had looked away on purpose, whether Everett's connections ran deeper than an expense account and a badge override. Colt began working on that question Thursday morning. He found the answer by Thursday afternoon. Mercer Aldine, 63, a senior board advisor who had served the firm since Warren's 3rd year, had been having private dinners with Everett for the past 5 months. No firm business listed. Personal relationship, according to Everett's calendar. But 3 of those dinners had been attended by Sable's business attorney, a man whose name appeared on 2 of the Voss Creative Services invoices, and the restaurant receipts showed a 4th person at every table. A name Colt recognized immediately. Trevelyan Cross, 55, an outside developer who had been quietly attempting to acquire Merritt Holloway's client portfolio for 2 years. He had failed every approach because the firm's ownership structure, routed through Wavecrest Partners, made a straightforward acquisition legally impossible. He had never been able to determine who controlled Wavecrest. He had apparently decided to go around the wall instead of through it. If Everett could access and export Merritt Holloway's proprietary design packages, the unreleased concepts, the early-stage proposals, the years of development work that formed the firm's competitive edge, and deliver them to Trevelyan Cross under the guise of an independent consulting arrangement, the acquisition became unnecessary. The value could be stripped without buying the house. That was what they had been building. For 5 months, while Davia sat beside her father in hospital rooms and Everett told her she was too absorbed in grief to be a real partner, they had been using his badge and her husband's access to dismantle the thing her father had built. Davia read Colt's report on Friday evening. She set it on the drafting table beside the divorce papers. She looked at both for a long moment, then she called Serafina. "Is the Holloway Bridgement client presentation still scheduled for the end of the month?" "Yes," Serafina said. "Full board review. All major partners, the development committee, 2 press contacts, and the city planning liaison." "Good," Davia said. "Don't change anything." Serafina was quiet for a moment. "Everett is scheduled to present." "I know," Davia said. "Let him prepare." There was a silence on the line that felt less like confusion and more like recognition. Serafina had known Warren Merritt for 30 years. She had watched him survive 2 hostile approaches, a market collapse, and a partner betrayal that had nearly dissolved the firm in its 8th year. She had watched him come back from all of it, quietly, without drama, by being more prepared than anyone expected. She recognized what she was hearing in his daughter's voice. "I'll have everything ready," Serafina said. What no one on Everett's side understood was that Davia had been in the Holloway Bridgement project from the beginning, not visibly, not in any document that bore her name publicly, but her hand was in every major decision that had shaped the project. The site selection criteria, the phasing structure, the community benefit language that had made the city's planning office favorable when other developers were being turned away. She had worked on it the way she worked on everything, without credit, without announcement, without anyone in the room needing to know who she was. That was how her father had taught her to protect the work, not by claiming it loudly, by knowing it completely. Everett had presented himself as the architect of the firm's direction on this project. He had told the development partners that the Holloway Bridgement approach was his vision, shaped by his instincts. He had said this in meetings Davia had not attended because she preferred it that way. He had said this in the interview that ran in a regional design publication 3 weeks earlier, while Davia sat in a hospital corridor waiting for her father's test results. She had read that interview in the parking lot of the cardiac wing, in the front seat of her car, with a cup of cold coffee in her hand. She had not cried. She had not called anyone. She had driven to the office, gone through the East Wing entrance, sat at the archival desk, and pulled every project record that touched the Holloway Bridgement account. It took her 2 hours to map exactly how much Everett had taken from the firm's collective work and reframed as his own contribution. It took her another hour to understand what he had given away in the file exports. After that, she called Colt and told him to preserve everything under legal hold. That had been the beginning. Now, 11 days later, Davia stood in the East Wing corridor outside the presentation room, listening to the sound of people arriving for the board review. She wore a dark dress with no ornamentation except her father's watch, which she had asked the nurse to remove from his wrist during one of the longer days when she had needed something to hold. It sat on her left wrist, heavy, old, familiar. She did not go in with the first group. She let Everett settle. Let him arrange his materials, accept the compliments of the development committee. Exchange easy words with Mercer Aldin near the coffee table. She watched through the glass panel beside the door as he moved through the room with the particular ease of a man who believed the evening had already been decided. Sable was not present. This was a board event, credential-controlled. But Davia knew Sable would be watching the summary report before morning. Trevelyan Cross had sent his associate, a younger man in a good suit who sat near the back of the room and looked at his phone slightly more than the occasion warranted. Beck stood beside Davia in the corridor. She did not speak. She had spent the past 11 days not saying things that Davia had not needed to hear, which was why she was the only person Davia had allowed to stand here. "Ready?" Bex asked. Davia looked at her father's watch. Her father had bought it the year the firm turned a profit for the first time. He had worn it to every major presentation for 40 years. She remembered sitting across from him at the drafting table when she was 19, while he was preparing for a city council pitch that would determine whether the firm survived its 4th year. He had looked at the watch and said, "A room full of people who doubt you is still just a room. You built the table. That matters more than who sits at it." She had not understood it fully then. She understood it now. "Yes," she said. She did not enter through the main door. She entered through the presentation's side entrance, which opened directly beside the display wall. No one saw her come in. She moved to the back of the room without speaking to anyone and stood in the shadow of the projection partition. Her hands still, her face composed. Everett was already speaking. He stood at the head of the table with his presentation on the main screen, the Holloway Bridgement development in full visual detail, the phasing plan, the community integration model, the city partnership structure. He spoke about it with ownership, with the vocabulary of a man who had originated every idea in front of him. This project defines a new direction for the firm, Everett said. And tonight I want to walk through the approach that I've spent the last year building. Davia watched the room. Most of the board members were listening with the patient attention of people who had seen many presentations and were waiting to be surprised. The development committee lead was nodding slightly. Mercer Aldine sat with his hands folded, a composed expression that Davia now read differently than she had a month ago. Trevelyan Cross's associate had stopped looking at his phone. Everett moved to the site selection rationale. His language was confident, detailed, specific. He spoke about community benefit frameworks as though he had invented them for this project. Davia had written the first draft of that framework. She had written it 18 months before Everett joined the firm at her father's drafting table at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, with a cup of tea that had gone cold and her father's notes spread beside her laptop. The room did not know that yet. Everett advanced to the next slide. Colt, standing near the side wall, caught Davia's eye. He gave a small nod. Everything was in place. Serafina had a folder on the table in front of her that she had not opened yet. Lyndon was in the projection control room. Everett reached the section of his presentation that dealt with the residential annexes, the portion of the Holloway Bridgemont project that represented the most significant development opportunity, and the same set of files that had been exported from the restricted archive without authorization. He said, "The annex concept represents original thinking that I've brought to this firm." The word original landed in the room, and Davia stepped out of the shadow. She did not make a sound. She did not announce herself. She simply moved from the partition into the visible portion of the room, and people saw her, and the room shifted the way rooms shift when something changes that cannot be changed back. Serafina opened her folder. Everett turned. He saw her, and his expression did a thing that Davia had not expected. It did not collapse into guilt. It went cold, as though her presence was an intrusion, as though she had walked into his event uninvited. "Davia," he said. The way he said her name was the same way he had said it in the hospital room, like it embarrassed him. "I apologize for interrupting," she said to the room, not to him. The board chair, Hendrik Quall, 66, a meticulous man who had served the firm for 12 years and had never once raised his voice at a meeting, looked between the two of them. "Mrs. Crane," he said carefully, "I'd like to table something before this presentation continues," Davia said, "with the board's permission." Mercer Aldine sat up slightly. Something moved behind his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. The same calculation Davia had watched Cross's associate perform when Everett had used the word original. Hendrik nodded slowly. "Please." Davia did not have a presentation. She had documents. Colt distributed them. Serafina remained at the table because she had already seen what they contained, and her presence was more useful as a steady point in the room. "The project materials Everett has presented tonight are drawn substantially from firm development records that predate his tenure by 16 months, Davia said. The community benefit framework, the phasing structure, and the annex concept originated in internal working documents that exist in the firm archive with verified timestamps." She paused. "Those same documents were exported without authorization from the restricted archive on the night of the 14th, using credentials belonging to Everett by an individual whose visitor access was limited to daytime marketing functions." The room was very quiet. Everett stood at the head of the table. He did not yet speak. His expression was the expression of a man trying to locate the correct response among several options, none of which were working. "That's not," he started. "The export log is in front of you," Davia said to the board. "Not to him. The badge access record is behind it. The archive camera footage is available through internal security. All materials are under legal hold as of the 17th. Trevelyan Cross's associate stood up. He said something about needing to make a call. Lyndon was at the door before he reached it, not blocking, just present. The associate sat back down. Mercer Aldine said, "I'm not sure what the purpose of this is." Colt set a second set of documents in front of him. "Mr. Aldine, these are the attendance records for 5 dinners held between September and January. Your name appears at all 5, as does the name of the attorney who incorporated Voss Creative Services, the LLC that received consulting payments through the Holloway Bridgemont project account." Mercer's composure cracked, not loudly. It was a small thing. His jaw tightened and his hands moved to the table, and a particular quality left his face, the quality of a man who still believed he was in control of the room. He was not. Everett found his voice. "You don't have authority to do this." Davia looked at him for the first time directly since she had entered. "Everett," she said, "Wavecrest Partners holds the controlling interest in Merritt Holloway Design Group. Wavecrest Partners is administered by me. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. "I am the majority owner of this firm," she said. "I have been since my father transferred administrative control to me 3 years ago. You have been employed, budgeted, and credentialed by a company I own. The projects you've been presenting as your vision exist because my family built the foundation you've been standing on." Everett stared at her. He said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, because the weight of what he did not know had just landed on him all at once, and there was no prepared answer for that particular gravity. "You lied to me," he said finally. The words came out quiet and wrong, like an accusation made by someone who had not looked at their own hands. "You didn't ask who I was," Davia said. "You decided, and you decided incorrectly." She turned back to the board. "The firm will be pursuing formal action regarding the unauthorized archive access, the fraudulent expense classifications, and the misrepresentation of intellectual property. Outside counsel has been retained. Everett's executive credentials are being suspended effective tonight. Mercer Aldine's board advisory role is under review by the Ethics Committee, pending the documentation in front of you." She set one final document on the table. The board chair looked at it. His face was careful and still. "This is the ownership transfer record," he said. "Yes," Davia said. "My father signed the administrative transfer 14 months ago. It was filed with Wavecrest Partners' legal record. It has always been available for review by the board. No one requested it. No one had, because no one had thought to. Because a quiet woman in an archival office carrying old folders did not look like the person who held the building's seal. That was what Everett had counted on. That was what he had gotten wrong." Hendrik Quall looked at Everett. "Your access will need to be surrendered tonight." Everett looked at Davia. She did not look back. She was already watching Lyndon move toward Trevelyan Cross's associate, who had begun inching toward his bag. She was already thinking about Orin. No, about the young designer on the Holloway Bridgement team, a 26-year-old named Pell Grady, who had spent 8 months developing the Annex concept under Everett's mentorship and had been told, when the project went to full presentation, that his name would be listed as a research contributor. Pell sat near the back of the room. He had not been invited to this meeting. He had come because Lyndon had quietly told him to attend, that there was something at this presentation worth seeing. He was sitting very still. Davia walked to the back of the room and stood beside him. She set one hand briefly on the table next to his. "Your name is going on this project," she said. "Completely and correctly." Pell looked at her. He was the kind of young that made experience feel like something he hadn't been allowed to hold yet. His eyes went from her face to the board chair to Everett, still standing at the head of the room with the architecture of his own lies visible around him. "I thought he was helping me," Pell said. "I know," Davia said. She thought about her father, about the way he had once sat beside a young draftsman in the firm's early years whose concept for a library renovation had been absorbed into a senior partner's presentation without credit. Warren had ended that partnership. He had given the young man a direct commission. He had told Davia afterward, "A firm that steals from the people inside it deserves to be lost to itself." She understood now what he had been preparing her for. Everett submitted his access badge that night. He did not speak to Davia again in the room. As he passed her near the door, he stopped for a moment. She felt him looking at her profile. She did not turn. He said her name once more. She waited. "I didn't know," he said, and she couldn't tell even then whether he meant the company or her. She looked at him. "That was always the problem," she said. He left. Sable left the building before the security team reached her floor. Mercer Aldine submitted a resignation letter before morning. Trevelyan Cross's associate left without speaking to anyone and did not return. In the days that followed, the legal process moved the way legal processes do, carefully, thoroughly, without the satisfaction of a clean moment. Outside counsel verified the export records. The expense misclassifications were catalogued and referred to financial review. The Voss Creative Services invoices were traced and frozen. Pell Grady's project documentation was authenticated and his credit formally restored. Everett's attorney reached out twice. Davia's attorney responded twice. The divorce proceedings were filed correctly. With the prenuptial agreement, Davia's father had quietly insisted upon before the wedding, which had never seemed important to Everett because he had never believed there was anything to protect against. The agreement rendered every attempt at claim irrelevant. His attorney did not reach out a third time. 3 weeks after the board presentation, Davia stood in her father's hospital room. The machines were fewer than before. His color was better. The cardiac team had revised their prognosis in a direction that used words like recovery and timeline rather than the words they had been using before. Warren Merritt opened his eyes on a Thursday morning and looked at his daughter and said, with the precise economy of a man who measured words the way he measured walls, "How's the Bridgemont?" Davia sat beside him and told him. She told him about Pell and about the restored credit, and about the board's vote to restructure the advisory committee, and about the annex concept moving forward under its correct authorship. She told him about Lyndon and Seraphina and Colt and what they had each done in the 11 days that mattered most. She told him about the presentation room and the documents and the silence after the ownership disclosure. She did not tell him about the hospital room and Everett and the envelope on the chair arm. Not yet. Some things could wait until he was stronger. Warren looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter. He looked at his watch on her wrist. "You answered with the work," he said. "Yes," Davia said. He was quiet for a while. "Then your mother always said you were the one who understood what we built. Not because you loved the buildings, because you loved what they were for." Davia did not answer. She held his hand and looked at the window where the morning light was coming through at a low angle across the floor. She thought about the archival office. She thought about the East Wing entrance and the frosted glass and the years she had spent being invisible by choice, not by smallness. She thought about the boardroom and Pell's face and Everett's voice saying her name at the door. She thought about what it felt like to stop being quiet in a room built by the people who loved her. Not loudly, not with drama, just present, fully, finally, entirely present. The next morning, she entered Merritt Holloway through the main entrance for the first time. The lobby staff looked up. A few of them paused. She did not make an announcement. She did not need to. She walked beneath the name on the building, her name, her family's name, the name Everett had worked beneath without ever knowing. And she carried nothing but her father's watch and a small folder of project notes and the particular steadiness of a woman who had always known what she owned and had only now decided to let the room know too. Some people see a quiet woman and assume she has nothing to protect. They are always wrong. They just don't find out how wrong until she decides it's time.